Welcome to the lecture for Unit 3, Chapter 4. This is Key Issue 1. Where are folk and popular leisure activities distributed? We got to understand the difference between a habit and a custom. Habit is a repetitive act performed by an individual. For example, one college sorority girl may start wearing a vest and boots and ends up looking like Han Solo. That is a habit. If she just happens to dress like that pretty much every day. And this I have witnessed. Now it becomes she looks like that. It becomes a custom when it becomes a repetitive act performed by a group. So if a lot of college sorority girls start wearing the Han Solo outfit, then you could really see it as a custom. Wearing a boots, for whatever reason, seems to be a trend or a custom among this demographic. Culture is a combination of three things. We're going to first look at customary beliefs, and then we'll go to material artifacts and social norms. So customary beliefs can range from something as complex as religion to how people drink tea. So the British believe, tea should be drunk hot and with milk, and sometimes people in the South, like me for instance, drink tea cold, sweet, and on the go. Material artifacts are the physical representations of culture. And there's a lot of things that fit into this category. These are things that survive even after a culture has moved on or has changed. It could be activities as well, not just physical artifacts as you might picture them. Activities like making certain foods, wearing certain clothing, also shelter, so the structures that we create, and leisure activities such as arts and recreation fit into this category of material artifacts. So up at the top you have modern Korean fashion, and this is kind of a strange in-between between folk culture and popular culture. It's obviously closer to popular culture, but Korean people put their own spin on it. And then you have a major representation of folk culture with this Saudi example of clothing in the bottom picture. Another example of this, as I said, could be architecture. And here we have land diving. This tower is a material artifact, and it reflects the culture of the people of the South Pacific island of Vanuatu. And they engage in this practice of land diving as a ritual to prove their manliness. And they basically create this huge, crazy structure, tie some vines to their legs, and dive off of it. Pretty unbelievable. Social norms are also a part of the culture of a place. In the image you see above, this was taken from an old candid camera experiment where this person would go onto an elevator and would always face the wrong direction. And what they found was that people, because it was terribly awkward to be in an elevator facing someone, they would face the wrong direction as well. And every time someone else got on, they would just adapt. And so standing in an elevator facing the right direction is an example of a social norm. Below you have two Japanese businessmen bowing to each other as a sign of respect upon greeting each other. That's a social norm. Shaking someone's hand or giving them a fist bump, depending on the setting, is another social norm. Another social norm would be which side of the road it is proper to drive on. And this map shows countries that drive on the wrong side of the road. Of course, note it doesn't say which color is wrong, and that means you get to decide. From most of the world's perspective, driving on the right side is the right side. Now let's talk about folk and popular culture, and we're going to start with folk culture. Some things to note about folk culture that are just about always true is that folk culture has anonymous hearths. That means you don't know where these elements of folk culture started. Okay, that hearth is the place from which something diffuses, and we don't always know where it started. It's anonymous. And it is possible to have multiple hearths where things are originating independently. Folk culture also reflects anonymous sources. So a song, for instance, a folk song like House of the Rising Sun, which I'm putting up a link to, is an old folk song and no one knows who wrote it. Certainly know a lot of people who covered it later on or popularized it, but no one knows who wrote the song. Unknown dates, unidentified originators. And this is because most elements of folk culture were passed down orally from generation to generation, and most elements of folk culture were not produced in order to make money. And so people weren't terribly concerned about who got credit for it. And this goes from music to like what you're seeing up here, and that probably doesn't look like the kind of music you want to listen to art such as the totem poles shown below. Popular culture is very different. Popular culture is a product of developed countries. And that's important because it's in developed countries that, one, people have expendable cash to spend on elements of popular culture, but more importantly, because information can be shared and communication can happen quickly and to mass audiences. And so ideas can be spread very rapidly to a large number of people. Typically, popular culture originates in North America or Europe, and the origin is often traceable to a specific person or corporation in a particular place. So if a trend catches on, there's usually a specific person who started it. We don't always know who that is, especially when you think about some memes that go around the internet. It's hard to know who started it. But in general, the music and the products that we enjoy, we can attach them to particular people or businesses. Top picture, you have electronic dance music, of course, using technology that's available in modern countries, combining that with mass appeal. It might not appeal to me, but it appeals to a lot of people. Silly bands, this is a great example of a trend that catches on and spreads from person to person to person, but is also spread hierarchically in that a business decides that they're going to start selling silly bands at the checkout register, and so more and more people have access to them, and so the trend gets to carry on. Pizza is a great example of popular culture. It's mass-produced. It has great appeal to just about everybody, and it is something that is marketed by a number of different countries. So when we talk about popular culture, one of the things we like to talk about is trends. One of the big trends right now, especially with my generation, millennials, is avocado toast. I understand avocado is delicious, but it's getting out of hand. So I really like the news article that I saw. Millionaire to millennials, stop buying avocado toast if you want to buy a home, because this stuff gets really expensive. But it's a trend, and people like being in on what's hot. People like being in on trends. Let's talk about how folk culture and popular culture are diffused. Folk culture diffusion happens on a small scale and it happens slowly. Ideas are transmitted from one location to another primarily through relocation diffusion. But popular culture is transmitted by way of hierarchical diffusion, and it diffuses rapidly and extensively from hearths or nodes of innovation, and it does so with the help of modern communications. The first big example of this was the radio. Think of how you had to convey information to someone before the radio. You could use technology, yes, but you were only conveying it to one person at a time. With the radio, if you have a message and the ability to broadcast, anyone with a radio can pick up your message. And so this changes everything. This changed music, this changed news, it changed business with advertising, and it is really the start of popular culture. But once we got television as technology, it only intensified it. And of course, the advent of the internet has seen a dramatic increase in the rate at which popular culture changes. And what about the distribution? So where you find these types of culture. Folk culture, being a combination of local, physical, and cultural factors, is isolated, I should say. So those physical and cultural factors influence its distribution, and it really exists in places where it can be isolated from other cultures. Because when it's isolated, it survives. It's kind of an interesting thing about culture. The more that someone from one culture interacts with another culture, the greater the chances that his culture will decline. Why is that? Well, he might like the way that this other culture does something, or he might like the other food of this other culture. So if he's going to start eating their food more, he's not going to make his food as much. And if he doesn't make his food as much, it doesn't get passed down to his children. Or if he adopts this religion, then he's not likely to pass on the religion associated with that folk culture to his kids. So isolation is a big part of this. And we have the example of the Amish living in the countryside in the eastern United States. Popular culture. Popular culture is widely distributed across many countries with little regard for physical factors. So it doesn't matter if there's a mountain in the way, because you can still watch TV on the other side, and you can still gain access to that popular culture because you're not limited necessarily to where you are. The principal obstacle really is a lack of income, right? So if you can't afford a television, then you're probably not going to be a part of that popular culture. This map shows diffusion and distribution of soccer by depicting World Cup qualifiers for the final round. Most countries in Europe and Latin America have qualified for the World Cup finals, and as soccer diffuses worldwide, qualification has increased in other regions. Over 1 billion people watched the last World Cup, which is significantly more than the number of people who viewed the last Super Bowl. Of course, a lot of this has to do with people having access, but as technology becomes more and more cheap and more people have access to televisions, we're only going to see this one go up because soccer is so widespread. A cultural region is a part of Earth's surface that has common cultural elements. Although cultural regions may identify a dominant characteristic, that does not mean everyone in that region shares that same trait. So, for example, Islam, we can definitely consider the Middle East or Southwest Asia, as it's better known, or as it should be known, to be a cultural region of Islam. That is not to say that everyone in the Middle East is Muslim, because that's certainly not true. This cultural region can be broken into 4 broad components: core, domain, sphere, and outlier. The core is the heart. This is the area of a cultural region where the traits of a given culture are most strongly expressed. So this is often going to be the hearth also, from which the culture diffuses. The domain surrounds the core. Traits are not as strongly expressed as they are in the core, and the sphere surrounds the domain, where traits are not as strong as they are in the domain. And the outlier marks the edge of a cultural region. So outside of the outlier, you're going to have maybe a different culture or a combination of cultures. It's not going to be tied to that one. It's not going to be tied to the core. Here's what that looks like. Very simple: core, domain, sphere, and then outlier. So let's look at an example: the Mormon religion. The core of the Mormon religion is Salt Lake City, Utah. The domain of Mormon culture is spread out to other parts of Utah and other surrounding states. And the cultural region extends to further parts of the sphere and then reaches its boundaries at the outliers. Even though the Mormon culture appears in these areas, it isn't as prevalent as it is in the core regions. And we'll look at a map to see this. So here in green, you have more than 50% of residents being members of the Church of Latter-day Saints, aka Mormons. This is from 2000. And as you can see, as you move out, it decreases. Let's talk about music. Again, folk music, like any element of folk culture, originates anonymously. It is transmitted orally. Modifications to songs over successive generations represent changes in conditions. Content of songs centers on events in daily life that are familiar to the majority of people. So it's simple stuff. Things like birth and death, marriage, things related to the environment like agriculture or climate. Migration of people also diffuses the music. Some students have found a YouTube video called The Worst Country Song Ever. It really reflects these elements of folk culture in its lyrics, which you can find on YouTube, though I don't advise it. Modern country music really has its roots here, and so the content of country music really until recently has been very simple stuff, life stuff. Now more recently, country music has become very similar to pop music in that it's just kind of about nothing. So thanks, Nashville, for ruining country music. The first folk rock song. So the first song that really made the connection between folk music and folk culture and rock music and pop culture or popular culture was the House of the Rising Sun, which again, no one knows who wrote it, but the Animals performed it, probably the most famous performance of it, and it kind of pushed their career. And this was a British rock band singing an American folk tune. So you can look at that video as well. Popular music is written by specific individuals with specific intentions. It's meant to be sold. It's meant to be able to make money off of it. It's meant to be performed in front of a paying audience. It often displays a high degree of technical skill, not necessarily on the part of the performer, but often. And musicians often have strong connections with other similar musicians that may span the globe. Limited connections with local musicians of different genres. So there is a lot that is unknown by the general public about popular music today. And as it is a dynamic field, things are changing. Your book doesn't really go into much detail on how it works, but I think it's at least interesting to note that the music that we mostly hear on the radio today or see at the top of the charts is produced by huge teams of people. And there's this strategy known as track and hook, where you have people known as top liners who write the lyrics and the melodies, and you have different people known as producers who write the beats. And a top liner might come up with a lyric and a melody, and we'll put it out there, and then a producer will come up with the beat and try to find a good lyric and good melody that fits with it. And so they will basically make a song in different parts, and someone will put them together and say, oh, this will work. And then they will find a good performer for it. And they'll say, and so a lot of songs that were originally intended for one performer actually ended up getting performed by another. I don't know the name of the song because I don't keep up with this stuff, but a song that was originally intended for Leona Lewis was taken by Nicki Minaj, and that's just kind of how this thing goes. What a lot of people don't realize is that so many of these famous songs are really written by just a couple people. So there's this Swedish dude named Max Martin, and or at least that's his performer name. Here's a list of songs that he wrote. He wrote the Backstreet Boys song "Quit Playing Games with My Heart." He wrote Taylor Swift's "Shake It Off," "Blank Space," and "Bad Blood." He wrote Katy Perry's "I Kissed a Girl," "California Girls," and "Teenage Dream." He wrote NSYNC's "It's Gonna Be Me." He wrote Pink's "So What," and he wrote Maroon 5's "One More Night." And of course, Britney Spears' breakout hit, "Hit Me Baby One More Time." They're all written by this guy. He writes your favorite songs, and there's plenty more people like him. And this is really quite normal. This is really quite normal. There have been some recent memes in response to Kanye West criticism over the artist Beck getting Album of the Year a couple years ago because people thought Beyonce should get it. And some of them have been quite funny, like this one, which compares Beyonce's lyrics from one of her songs to the lyrics of one of Beck's songs. And it's really not fair because they just picked like the silliest song on her album and compared it to one of his. But when someone like Kanye West says that Beck needs to respect the artistry and should have given the award to Beyonce, it's a bit ludicrous because, as many people said, Beck is the only producer, only writer on his album, and he plays like 10 instruments. And someone like Beyonce, not to pick on Beyonce, but she's one of many, has 72 different people working on her album. 72 different people, up to 7 people per song. She's always listed as a writer, but the reality is that what happens, someone else writes a song, and like I said, multiple people will write it using track and hook method of songwriting, and then the artist will come in and they'll change like 1 or 2 words. They'll kind of change the bridge or put their own spin on it, and then they get to be listed as a writer. And it's fine. It's just not really representative of what is actually going on. Origin and diffusion of folk and popular sports. So sports are a major leisure activity, and as such, they're an important part of a place's culture. They originated as isolated folk customs and diffused like other folk culture via relocation diffusion. So just like folk music making its way into popular culture, folk sports have become elements of popular culture through mass diffusion. So football or soccer, as it is known here, originated in England in the 11th century. It was transformed from folk to popular culture in 1800s when organized clubs were formed in the UK. Once professional players are hired, it becomes a big deal, and standardized rules and organized professional leagues established in 1863 in the UK marks the formal transition from folk sport to popular sport. And of course, being able to view games or matches, I should say, on television or hear about them on the radio or get updates about them on the internet. Again, those hallmarks of popular culture, those hallmarks of more developed countries, is a very big part of these being popular culture elements today. For example, cricket. Here we see boys playing cricket in Cottony, India. It diffused through relocation and hierarchical diffusion as the subcontinent of South Asia came under the control of the British Empire, upon which the sport was diffused to South Asia. That's all for today. Make sure that if you have any questions, you bring them to class. And it is also important that you keep up with the reading. And we'll see you next time.